Welcome to Resume the Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Page, and I'm here to spread the message that you can, in fact, be happy in your career. I'm a former executive recruiter turned career coach, and I am obsessed with learning about why people have chosen their career, what led them to that decision, and how they achieved happiness in the process. So, come join the ongoing conversation that exposes you to career paths of all origins with one thing in common: happiness. So, press play and let's resume the conversation with this week's episode. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Resume. And today we are honored to welcome a distinguished guest whose journey from pediatric medicine to parenting expertise has inspired countless individuals across the nation and worldwide. With a deep-rooted passion for child health and development, he has transitioned from celebrated Harvard-educated pediatrician to a renowned parenting expert, making waves in national news outlets like NBC, CBS, ABC, and as a featured contributor on all things parenting for online media sources, reaching over 150 million readers in publications that you've heard of, like the Huffington Post, Dr. Laura, She Knows, and more. He's also the author of multiple books that have become must-read for parents everywhere. He combines scientific insight with practical advice, offering strategies that are both effective and empathetic. He's a worldwide speaker and has captivated audiences at conferences and seminars worldwide, sharing wisdom that fosters a deeper understanding of the parent-child relationship. If you know who I'm talking about by now, you might know that he has a popular parenting podcast called Raising Daughters that has created a wonderful platform where challenging topics are discussed with honesty and a deep sense of care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tim Jordan. Hi, Dr. Tim. How are you?
I'm great. I sound busier than I feel.
I was going to say, that was a lot. That was a lot to get through. Clearly, you have been busy. Yeah. So I like to start off every episode by asking the same question. So if you were at a dinner party and somebody was chatting you up and eventually got to the question that they always get to, what do you do? What would your answer be?
I work with children in lots of different ways. I've been working with kids since I was a kid in lots of different ways. And so that's probably the best overall blanket description.
What do you mean by you have been working with kids since you were a kid? In what capacity? That's interesting.
Well, growing up, I had two older brothers, and then then they had me. Then my parents said, "Oh, we're never going to have any girls." Then they had 5 girls. And so,
wow.
Yes. And my youngest 2 sisters were 9 and 10 years younger. So I grew up changing diapers, babysitting. I umpired Core League baseball. I worked in summer camps, 3 or 4 summers. I started working with kids in lots of different ways when I was young, and I always enjoyed it and always wanted to be a dad. And I used to think that when I grew up, I wanted to own an orphanage.
Wow.
that didn't come to be. My career which I guess we'll talk about, has evolved slowly but surely into all kinds of different ways of working with kids.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the first kind of more professional foray into that was pediatrics. So what was the decision-making factor behind that? Obviously, you wanted to work with kids, but what drew you to medicine?
Well, when I was in college, my first 2 years, I thought I either wanted to be a teacher or a pediatrician. I was going to work with kids maybe in that way. I always envisioned myself as a 3rd grade teacher because I thought that was like the sweet spot age.
Interesting.
And so I took education classes. I took the pre-med, biology, chemistry, those kinds of things. And at the end of my sophomore year, I went into the pre-med advisor's office, Brother John Donahue. I used to go into his office a few times a year when I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I always walked out of his office feeling like I was $1 million. He was just the nicest guy. And he told me, he said, you'd be a great teacher. You love kids, blah, blah, blah. He said, but after a while, you might get a little bit tired or bored. So then you might be able to become a principal. But he said, there isn't a lot of other offshoots from that. He said, if you go to medical school and get your MD and become a pediatrician, he said, in the long run, that might open up more doors for you. He said, I'm not telling you what to do, but you might want to consider that. And that struck a chord. And so I ended up going into pre-med.
When you decided to go into pre-med, so you were halfway through college at that point, it sounded like?
Yes.
Yeah. That's common. Usually, you can go in and you don't have to declare right away. I'm just thinking of like teacher or pre-med. Those are so different. It's just such a different core curriculum that just totally different like side of the brain in my opinion. How was that? I mean, were you interested in biology? Were you interested in, you had to have been, relatively interested in the chemistry and biological aspects of medicine. But I don't think I've ever heard of a doctor who decided to become a doctor because of kids, as opposed to, I really like helping people and I like to focus that on kids. You kind of went the other way around, which is really interesting. Yeah.
And looking back, in retrospect, I was not a scientist. I still am not a scientist. Chemistry, physics, all those things were so hard for me. I did not have that kind of brain. I worked my butt off in those last 2 years of college because I had a little bit of catching up to do as well. So like my junior year, I had organic chemistry, microbiology, and physics all year and labs in all of them. And I was working in the cafeteria. I was on the tennis team. But I was a busy little bee and it was so hard and so stressful. But I got through. And the first 2 years of medical school were just torture because it's mostly basic science stuff again. That, in retrospect, it wasn't a bad decision, although I wish I had majored in history. That was my real interest or something like that.
Wow.
As opposed to the sciences. But I was told, well, if you're going to go try and get into medical school, that'll look good in your application. So that's probably one of the reasons why my career forked out of being a pediatrician. We'll get to that, I guess, several years in.
Yeah. So let's get to that. So you were a pediatrician for how many years?
Well, I did my medical school. I did my 3-year residency, became a board certified pediatrician. And then I decided to do a 2-year fellowship in something called developmental and behavioral pediatrics. I had developed an interest with lots of different experiences that had crossed my path. And so I decided to do that. And I ended up doing a year in Oregon and a year in Boston, which was hard because my wife and I got married right after I graduated medical school. We had our first kid, our daughter, in Florida. And then she was 1. We moved to Oregon. Then TJ was born in Oregon. Then we moved to Boston. When I was done with all that, we moved back to St. Louis because that's where all of our families were. And then John came along 2 years later. But I started out being a general pediatrician. We went to this small town just outside of St. Louis. I had this vision of I'm going to do part-time developmental peds and part-time, regular pediatrician. I wanted to develop both of those and then decide at some point which one do I resonate with the most. Mm-hmm. But after 3 years in this small town, I had joined a guy. It was brutal. That's back in the day of beepers, not cell phones.
Yeah.
And we were so busy. And I realized after not too long, I don't like this lifestyle. I want more flexibility with my schedule. I wanted to be able to do other things, even though I didn't even know what I wanted to do. So after about 2.5 years or so, as a pediatrician, we moved back up to St. Louis and I started my counseling practice. So as a developmental behavioral pediatrician, I decided I want to do that. And I didn't really have a plan other than I don't want to be a general pediatrician, but I'll just sort of, meander my way into whatever it looks like.
Yeah. So can you, if someone's listening and they're not quite sure what the difference is between like, what's a general pediatrician? What is the difference between general pediatrics and developmental pediatrics and behavioral pediatrics? Or do developmental and behavioral go together? Like what are all of these very big terms?
It's complicated. It is complicated. Being a general pediatrician means this is a pediatrician you go to for your well checkups, your immunizations, your gut strep throat, that. The developmental behavioral pediatrics, it was interesting because there was lots of different places that would train you around the country, and all of them were a little bit different. Some of them, focus on kids who were atypically developing, kids who had cerebral palsy, who were slow, kids with, different kinds of developmental issues, preemie graduates, for instance. Some of them were more like learning disability, ADHD kinds of issues. Some of them were more things like the year I spent in Boston with Dr. Brazelton. It was more normal development and working with families and learning how to guide parents. So all the places were different. So I kind of had 2 different fellowships because the Oregon place was more the disability kind of thing and the preemie graduates and all that. And the Boston one was normal development and working with people. And Dr. Brazelton had a background in psychoanalysis besides being a developmental pediatrician. So I learned all that kind of thing. So I kind of had a hybrid training. So I decided when I stopped being a pediatrician that I wanted to do that. And it would look like, in the early days, I saw a lot of little kids because my training in Boston was a lot of with kids who were younger, toilet training issues and sleeping issues and temper tantrums and, things of that sort. And I just slowly but surely started seeing older and older kids.
Okay. Okay. And so now, as you're really well entrenched in this developmental and behavioral aspect of, pediatrics, you have also kind of steered over more towards girls and mental health. And what brought you there? Like, what was you have both a daughter and two sons, it sounds like.
Yes.
So what was so intriguing about girls' development as opposed to boys?
Well, can I backtrack 1 second? Just
Totally. Yeah.
One of the things my wife and I did when I switched over to becoming a developmental pediatrician, obviously I was not very busy at first as I was developing a practice. So we took a weekend retreat in Austin, Texas. This was in 1988, I think. It was like a personal growth kind of retreat, enrichment, just learning about yourself, blah, blah, blah. And it was awesome. We loved it. I had never done anything like that. Because, when you in the medical profession, you go to college, you go to medical school, you do your residency. It's like you're on this track. And then boop, you get plopped out, at some point. So I had never really done that kind of personal growthy kind of work. So then we decided, let's run those retreats here in St. Louis. So we did a 2-year training process to be able to teach those retreats to adults. And then we ran those for probably 6, 7, 8 years. But I didn't really want to work with adults. It was really fun. I learned so much. So in the early days, after doing that for a year or so, we decided a lot of adults in those retreats were working through issues that had their seeds when they were kids, right? Old experiences, whatever, adversities, challenges, traumas, whatever. And so I thought, why are we waiting till people are 30, 40, 50 to work through those things? So we started running weekend retreats for teenagers and summer camps. This is our 33rd year. With the focus being, besides fun and summer camp, also personal growth. So part of every weekend retreat, part of every summer camp week day, we'll sit in a circle with a group, small group. Like in the weekends, it's 20. In the summer camp, it's 2 groups of 25. And we'll sit and talk about life. We give them a chance to share and talk about things going on in their lives, adversities that they've been going through. So part of my reason for, sliding into just girls about 18 or so years ago was our camps became, if I can say this in 2024, more girl friendly.
Okay.
Meaning, it was a good fit to sit in a circle and talk about your feelings and, share with each other. That was a little bit more, is easier for girls. It
was just more accepted for girls to do that.
The girls loved it. But at the end of the week, that was their favorite part. And the boys were like, oh my God, they need personal growth. But I think the package we were delivering became less boy friendly, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And so that, plus I was getting burned out in my counseling practice. I was seeing a lot of boys who were angry and were on the spectrum or who weren't motivated in school. And I don't know, I just got burned out. It wasn't as fun.
Yeah.
I was 50-ish. I guess I was 50-ish or something. And I was whining about it and complaining. And I was like, why am I complaining? I'm totally in charge of my schedule and my life. So I just
created this.
Right. So I said, no more. We started making the weekend retreats and the summer camps, all girls. And I wish we had done it earlier because it's so much, it's much safer environment for girls to work through their stuff when there aren't boys there to distract them.
Yeah.
And my wife would say also, growing up with 5 younger sisters led me, that's a piece of the puzzle as well.
Totally. I was going to say also, you kind of did this already as a young adult or a young older kid. What are some of the main or most common adversities or topics really that come up either in the camp or in your own, client to client personal practice with girls? And I'll stop there. Yeah. So what is like one of the more common issues that girls seem to come to you for?
I'd say a couple of things. One of them is just the stress and pressure the girls are under today. And we can talk about that if you want. Another one is just emotional overload that ends up leaking out as anxiety or mild to moderate depression. And the other one is friendship things. There's friendship issues, drama, excluded by friendship groups. I see girls also with family issues, families where parents are fighting or parents are distracted, not around much, divorcing, separated. But I would say that the emotional stuff, the stress, the pressures and all that, and anxiety, that's probably the biggest thing I work with.
Yeah. What leads to those issues? If you dig down into it, what causes those pressures?
Well, the emotional things, which is part of it. What I have found is when even girls who come to my counseling practice and they've been diagnosed with anxiety disorder or depression, some are on meds, some are not. most of the girls I see, once I work with them a little bit, I don't think they have a disorder or, a diagnosis. I think what they have is overload. Life happens. Some girls, says something, disrespectful. The teacher's disrespectful. Their parents yell at them. They got a bad grade in the test. Are bigger things. They hit these adversities that causes them to feel upset, sad, angry, whatever. And because it's so easy today to be busy and distracted, they don't want to feel those things. They don't want to think about it. So they just whip out their phone and start scrolling.
Yeah.
Or they just keep really busy. And so it works. You can distract yourself from your feelings, but they don't go away. And so those feelings tend to build up to the point now where now they're on overload, they're on overwhelm, and it's got to go someplace. And it starts leaking out as problems falling asleep at night, stomach aches and headaches, anxiety, hard time focusing in school, depression, feeling kind of blah, being angry, snapping at their parents or people, snapping at themselves, self-talk and all that. So there's a huge cost in girls in not dealing with all those things. So that's one piece of the pie is they just need to learn to have quiet time where they can look at themselves and say, what's going on? What am I feeling? And start to investigate that and be with it and then release it, channel it, find some outlets for it that are healthy.
What are some healthy outlets?
Well, exercise. There's tons and tons of data that says that exercise is if girls come in with depression, that they just exercise 4 or 5 times a week, like 25 minutes or something. That's as effective as medication.
Yeah.
And also just quiet time. I get a lot of girls who will express things through journaling, writing stories, writing poetry, writing songs. I have a whole wall in my office that has artwork. So I'll have them express their emotions through painting or drawing or whatever. And there's some incredible drawings of just the way they show that it feels on the inside. So I haven't find that an outlet that fits for them,
right,
and their interests. Some of the girls they'll do yoga classes just to learn to be more quiet and mindful. Meditation. There's lots of things like that. Talking it out obviously is helpful, but sometimes they don't have. It's hard for them to talk to their friends about some of those important things because they're so afraid of where it's going to go and who do I really trust. Even girls who have 50 friends a lot of times will tell us, like at our weekend retreats, I don't really have any friends I really trust. And plus they think they're crazy. They think they're the only one. They feel ashamed that they're feeling all these things. And so they hold on to it. That's
really interesting that they feel like they don't trust any of their friends. So I have so many questions. I guess, okay, I'm going to come back to that trust question because I think that's really interesting. How old are these girls? So when you talk about anxiety and depression and, all of this overload manifesting physically, I'm so glad you brought that up because that was a big question that I wanted to ask you about. What age does that start?
Well, it starts early. The majority of the girls who I see are in middle school, high school, probably 2/3. I'm also seeing more and more women who are in college. Some of them are previous campers or patients or just, I don't know, people here.
Well, because you've been doing it so long that now they trust you. And
the podcast, people all over the country, the world hear the podcast. And so a lot of times they say, I want my daughter to talk to him. And also I see some girls who are like the youngest ones are in like 4th-ish grade.
Okay. So like 9, 10. That's like,
what's interesting is you asked before about pressure and stress. We do an exercise sometimes at our weekend retreats, summer camps, where we put a long rope down the middle of the room and everybody stands on one side of it. And then we have a list of questions and we'll say, cross the line if. And we start out with cross the line if you have a pet, cross the line if you have an annoying sibling, cross the line, things. And then we start getting a little bit more, serious, like cross the line if you've ever been left out, cross the line if you've ever been teased, cross the line if you feel like your parents don't understand you. It's a way of sharing about yourself without talking, which is a nice early weekend retreat thing. But we ask the question also, cross the line if you ever feel overwhelmed with your emotions. And it used to be, it would be mostly middle school, high school girls. But now we get 4th and 5th graders who cross the line. Well, we also say cross the line if you ever feel stressed out or worried about your future. Almost all of them cross the line, 4th and 5th graders.
Yeah.
We've done that. We've done father-daughter retreats for 20-something years. There's a group that hires us to do them. And these are girls who are in like probably 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, like 9 to, I think they're 8 to 11, 10 or something like that. Anyway, so they're with their dads, sometimes with their moms, and we'll do that exercise with them. together. And we tell the dads or the moms, you cross the line as if you were your daughter's age. So your girls get to see, oh, wow, my mom or dad experienced this too. And when we say cross the line, if you ever worry about your future, and these are, again, those young girls, no dads cross over, no moms cross over, almost all the girls cross over. And the parents are like, mouths open, like, oh my God, I didn't realize. So the culture, the educational system has put this incredible amount of pressure on, this is boys and girls, but I only work with girls. I think it's more on girls. We expect more of girls academically. There's this one narrow path teaching girls you need to walk on. You need to get straight A's all the way through school. You need to apply and get into a top college. And from that top college, you get a good job, and then you make a lot of money. And if I ask a room of high school girls a lot of questions, what kind of grades do you want? Well, A's, you idiot. Why do you want A's?
Right.
That's the line. That's what they will say. Or I'll say, why do you want A's? They'll look at me in my counseling practice. I ask that question, and they'll go, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never thought about why would I want to get good grades. I'll ask them, you have any idea about what you want to do after high school? Well, I'm going to go to college. Why do you want to go to college? Well, nobody's been asking them questions their whole life. Why do you like soccer? What kind of grades do you want? Why would you, might you want to go to college? Instead, we've been pounding this narrow, expectation that a lot of people don't fit, right? Everybody need to go to college. Everybody's not going to get straight A's. No, everybody doesn't need to. Nobody needs to go to a top college. It's okay if you do, but you don't need to go. And do we really want our kids focusing their whole life on getting a great job and making a lot of money? Is that really our end line?
No, you don't have to. You're preaching to the choir.
That's a big piece of the pressure I have found is academically, all that. And in our experience, my wife and I doing all these retreats for 33 years, now it's filtering all the way down to grade school.
That's so interesting. And I really wonder what changed in the curriculum or in the educational system over the last 30 years that now it affects these really young girls. I mean,
part of it is that more people are applying to college than they did 40, 50 years ago. College has become incredibly expensive. If you look at the youth sports, it's become this incredibly intense thing that's a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah.
Number one, people making money got involved, which is always a recipe for disaster. No, it's often a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But there's pressure like, is my kid going to be able to get into college?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to afford it for my kid to get in college? But if they can get a scholarship playing soccer, then that's their ticket in. So that's one of the things that started ramping up, pressure about things like sports, which is my kid's ticket to get a college scholarship. Even though if you look at all the kids play youth sports, what percentage of them actually get a full ride to, as an athlete, it's like 5% or less.
Yeah.
It's tiny.
So,
so that's one of the things that started ramping up pressure. And I think that's still part of it, is trying to get there. And then it became this mantra, like it needs to be a top college.
Right.
U.S. News and World Report puts out this thing every year, like the top colleges and schools want to be able to say X percentage of our kids went to blank college. It just, the whole system has sort of amped up so childhood now has become a race to the top. There was a documentary, what was it called? I think A Race to Nowhere, what it was called. It was a really good documentary that came out several years ago.
Interesting. That's a great title. That's so interesting.
Parents are worried their kids are going to get beat. That's one of the biggest fears driving this.
Yes.
My kid's not going to be able to make their high school team. My kid's not going to be able to get into college. My kid's not going to keep up. I told parents in the 50s it was keeping up with the Joneses because your neighbor got a new washing machine or an appliance or a car or whatever. You got to keep up. And today, most people have stuff, but now it's keeping up with the Joneses' children.
Yeah.
Because you look across the street and their little 10-year-old is getting a professional coaching with a pitching coach. Or they're going to three camps this summer, soccer camps. And then this fear comes like, what if my kid, gets behind? And so that starts driving all of this energy and pressure. And then it starts coming from the home.
Yeah. So I know part of what you do is guiding parents on how they can be better parents and better guide their children towards things that they actually like and towards, happiness. So when that happens when you see that happening where parents are almost, this sounds really bad, but almost using their kids as like a societal pawn in a way. What are some things that parents can do to A, realize that they're doing that, and B, be more in tune with their kid and notice like what are some signs and, hints that parents can kind of pick up on that maybe, nonverbal little hints?
Part of it is I will encourage girls that I work with. I saw a girl yesterday who was in high school, and she's a senior, and her parents are all over about college applications and all this stuff. And so her parents love her. They care about her. They want her to do well. They want her to be successful, and too much in some ways. But it comes from a
good place, right?
A good place. So I think it's her responsibility as a just turned 18-year-old young woman to educate her parents. Like, this feels supportive. This feels like pressure. This is how I want you to support me as an 18-year-old woman. Just like I'd encourage even like 5th graders, 7th graders, 10th graders. It changes over time what you need from your parents. At one point, this may have felt good, but now it doesn't. So one thing is to educate the girls to advocate for themselves. And the other thing is I'd like to help parents become aware of the pressure on their girls. And part of it is I'll have them do a little dialogue or have the girl share with their parents how they're feeling about it, what they want. And a lot of times they've tried and their parents didn't really listen. They cut them off saying, well, that's not true. Or, well, I'm trying to help you get to college. And they're like, okay, you don't get it. So then they shut down. So I help them learn, the parents, to listen. And sometimes they hear things they had no idea what's going on in their daughters' minds or their hearts. So teaching them to listen better and to understand what their daughters are going through. And also that the things that they thought were helpful were not. They're actually adding undue pressure. So some of it's awareness and some of it is learning some skills.
Yeah. And it's so funny when you're talking about being 18 and having some kind of dialogue with your parent about college and like, this is supportive, this isn't, placing myself back there at like 18. There is also kind of this like financial power, where it's like, well, whether or not they're paying for all of your college or you have financial aid or whatever, a lot of the time your parents are paying for college. So they do feel entitled to like, well, you're not going to go and do art. Like, what job are you going to get with an art degree, and there are many, but in our society, it's kind of what you did, doctor, lawyer, like those kind of very track-oriented careers that parents feel secure about because they know that their kid will be able to take care of themselves. So I think, again, it comes from a good place, but I understand from the parents' perspective, this financial aspect. And I'm wondering how the girls can understand that and understand their parents and also advocate for themselves, because it gets so tricky, right? Like I'm sure they want to be respectful and they don't want to ruffle feathers. I think that's something a lot of girls are also taught not to do is, ruffle feathers.
Or disappoint their parents or disappoint the school or their teachers. That's huge. That's one of the pieces of the puzzle is they have to learn how to be aware of that and decide, do I really want to let my life be led by not wanting to disappoint people? Because it's not my life. I've heard so many stories from girls where they'll tell their parents things like, well, I think I want to be an artist, or I want to be a writer, or even I want to be a teacher. I've had probably several handful of girls in the last 3 or 4 years where their parents said, we're not going to pay for you to go to college to become a teacher. And the girls, why not? I've always wanted to be with kids. Because you have more potential than that. And
wow.
I just want to bash my Are you kidding me?
I thought they were going to say like, you don't make any money as a teacher, which is true.
They say that too. They say that too, but I've also heard like you're better than that, or that you have more potential than that.
Wow, that's pretty shocking.
I read a book several years ago by Daniel Pink. It was called A Different Kind of Mind. He talked about the different kinds of skill sets that young people need today to be successful. It's different than it was 10, 20, 50, whatever years ago. And so one of the things I remember he interviewed the CEO of Sony Electronics, and that CEO said, back in the day, he said, I was always looking for MBAs. I wanted people who had masters in business, all that. He said, but today, he said, I'm looking for MFAs. I want people who are creative. I want people, he said, my products are very similar to my competitors, similar price lines. He said, I need people who can evoke meaning and emotion in our products. I need people who can write, people who can communicate in that kind of way and be creative. So even though your degree might be in writing or that doesn't mean you're going to be sitting on a street corner doing portraits necessarily, because that kind of creativity and original thought kind of thing can be transferred to all kinds of things that are, all kinds of careers. But I think parents sometimes they have such a narrow vision that needs to be broadened. Like, these are good skills.
Yes. Yeah.
And can be transferred.
Creativity. It's so funny. When I first started this podcast, I wanted it to or at least like my initial, inception of it was that it would be about like careers and creativity and finding creativity in all different types of careers. And then it kind of, I worked through it. But through that, I did a lot of research on exactly what you're talking about. And creativity now is one of, if not the most important skill that employers look for in interviews, because it's not about whether or not you can paint. It's about what you're talking about is, thinking outside the box and being able to have that creative thought process and allowing yourself to go there as opposed to, stay in this like whatever, pre-designed box.
In the old days, quote unquote, people were taught you need to have a goal. I'm going to be the CEO of this company someday and make a lot of money and all that. And you need to have that goal by the time you're 18. You should march narrow vision, just work your butt off, nose to the grindstone until you get there. And at that point, that's when you'll feel happy and fulfilled. But, it was kind of like that was the mindset. But I've come to learn through experience and also from lots of reading that actually most people who are very successful in whatever they do started with fulfillment. They didn't end with it. So they picked things to do that were interesting to them. They had some passion for. It fulfilled them right from the start. And because they liked what they did and they were fulfilled by it, they were much more willing to put those 10,000 hours in that we talk about to become a master. They're willing to overcome adversity, keep at it and all that, because right from the start, it was fulfilling. So I think we need to be teaching kids that more so than this, grinded out, this narrow, singular kind of path. I developed this metaphor called the dot theory, where it's like those connect the dot drawings that you did when you were a kid. I'm sure you did those when you were a kid. So I tell them if that represents your calling, your purpose, your career, or just like the drawing, you'd say, what is it? I don't know. Well, then start connecting dots. So you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4. Eventually enough dots would connect it. Oh, it's going to be a Christmas tree, or oh, it's a starfish. So I tell young people, your job is not to know the final picture. Your job is to be open to dots. And dots are experiences that cross your path that you feel drawn to because it seems like fun. I don't know. My gut just says, I want to do this. Not because it fits in this little narrow
exciting
thing, because it's fulfilling, it's exciting. I want to do it. And I tell them, if you just keep following your gut and things that fulfill you, and you keep experiencing these dots, eventually those dots connect for you and your life will unfold for you instead of trying to force it. That's what people today are teaching kids. You got to force it. You need to know. Those kids are freaked out in my counseling practice. It was middle schoolers, about their futures, about college, about what major am I going to have. And that's ridiculous, right? They have their whole lives to sort of evolve into lots of things. I tell them, if you don't believe me, interview every adult you bump into, like your friends' parents, aunts, uncles, whoever, and say, when you were my age, when you were 16, 18, 22, did you know you'd be doing what you're doing now?
Right.
And I tell them, I guarantee you that 90% of them had no clue, that they zigzagged, they meandered their way to that thing. That's how life really works, not this narrow path thing.
Yeah. And I think you just hit it like nail on the head, where we had this preconceived notion as kids that your career path is linear, and it's just not. It just is not. And for whatever reason, we keep telling kids that it will be and they expect it to be. So when it isn't, when they come up against it and it's not, they feel like they're doing something wrong. And they're, then all of those things come into play where it's like they're embarrassed or they're too self-conscious to talk about it. I'm just so interested. I want to go back just real quick to the trust issue, because I think that has a lot to do with this. And I'm not exactly quite sure how, but I think it's interesting that so much of this has to do with intuition and trusting your gut and figuring out, like, what do I really need as a kid? What can I tell my parents that I need? And what do I really want? And trusting that intuition. And I think that's why I found it so interesting when you said, you have young girls come into your camps or into your practice for counseling, and they have all these friends, but they don't know which ones they can trust. And I'm just curious, in your experience, how big of an issue is trust with girls? Like, when does that lack of trust begin?
I think for a lot of girls, it begins with being left out by a group, losing their best friend. We do that cross the line thing. Cross the line, if you've ever lost a friend or been excluded by a group,
Mhm.
95% of them cross the line. I've done that exercise hundreds of times, always done the whole group, almost everybody. So
Yeah.
they've all had some experience. And what happens when they get excluded by their group is they go inside their head and they start asking themselves questions like, I wonder
What's wrong with me? Yeah.
why did they leave me out? Why are people not calling me anymore? Then they answer the question with their private logic, which is almost always faulty, because they'll start saying things like, maybe it's because I'm weird. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not cool enough. Maybe I'm not pretty enough. Maybe I'm awkward. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe I don't fit. So they start to wonder about that. So then they walk into other situations with that in their head. So then they're going to act different. And then it happens again. And then those initial thoughts become their beliefs. So they don't trust themselves. They don't trust that they're good enough or pretty enough or cool, not pretty, but they'll say,
Yeah, no, I think that is something that for sure, skinny enough, any of the, absolutely.
So they doubt themselves. That's one piece. So then it's hard they don't trust that they're going to be accepted. They don't trust that they're okay enough to deserve to have friends and all of that. So a lot of times they need to sort of reframe those beliefs. I help them see that I get why you decided that about you because of what happened. It's just not true.
Yeah.
It's not true that you got left out in fifth grade because you're not, it's a story you made up. I get why you did. So your job is going to be to reframe that and decide what really happened there. Was it really about me? And if not, I need to start deciding something different about myself. That's a huge piece, because if they can redecide that and they really believe that, I do deserve to have friends and I am a good person and all that, then they'll act differently when they're in situations. But because there's so much of that drama stuff happening around them, and rumors and gossip and things. And if I can say this, and schools don't do a very good job of helping girls to manage all of that. My wife, Ann, and I have a school program called Strong Girls, Strong World.
Yeah.
So we'll go into schools and work with classrooms of girls to help them learn how to get along and how to be in charge and responsible for their community. So we do all kinds of exercises and sharing. We do our circles. So they start to get more real with each other and they start to make commitments to each other about what they want for their class. This is not the school with posters on the wall. This is what they want in their language. And we teach them skills to resolve conflicts peacefully. We'll teach them some steps and we'll say, who wants to do a real conflict? We'll help you work it out. And we've done this for 30 years. We've never had a group of fourth graders, eighth graders, whatever, who didn't get a volunteer. They'll say, Carla, will you come in the middle? Sure. They come in the middle and then we guide them to working it out. And it's amazing how oftentimes they'll bring up something that happened like 3 years ago.
Wow.
Well,
and they're holding on to it.
Girls do that a lot, right? The girl said something rude or did something and that hurt their feelings, but they were so afraid of confronting her because if I confront her, she might get mad. If she gets mad, I'll lose her as a friend. And losing a friend is like a death. Not only will I lose her potentially, but she may take the whole group. And then I've got nobody. I'll be alone, and being alone is like a death. And that's been wired into.
I was just going to say that's so primal, right? Yeah.
It's been wired into the brain. So since they don't work it out, the feelings are still there. And so they just avoid people. There's little snarky things they do. Or they'll talk about that girl behind her back to get even. So it creates drama. So we help them to resolve conflicts and establish what they want with their class. And so it's amazing how much better it gets. But they need to have groups regularly to say anything we need to handle, something came up, let's work it out.
Yeah.
Because if you don't work it out, then they can't trust everybody. Because it is an untrustworthy, quote unquote, toxic environment. Who wants to go back to middle school, right?
I know, exactly. I was just thinking, of course, nobody wants to go back to high school or middle school. And just, as you're talking, I just keep hearing self-worth. So I think a lot of it ends up informing a girl's, self-worth. And that, if it's ignored for too long, informs their self-worth throughout the rest of their life. And, I just think this whole cycle, of not being able to trust people and then creating, that lack of self-trust and then creating those stories in your head about why they didn't pick you becomes your story of self-worth. And all of this ends up really just funneling down into not being able to trust yourself and thinking that you don't deserve things, which then informs your career choices and allowing people to really, steer you towards this is what you should be doing, because you don't trust yourself to say, well, no, that's not really, I don't think that's actually what I want, or I am actually worth a lot more than XYZ, or I want to be a teacher because I think I can reach my max potential as a teacher in doing X, however.
Yeah.
It's just,
And,
I think it's so interesting and such great work. Go ahead. Yeah.
I would say in order to trust your intuition, you need to have an awareness of it and access to it. And because girls are pretty busy and nobody likes to be alone and quiet, I think that's a detriment to them. So we teach girls in our camps and things how to quiet themselves. We do all kinds of mindfulness kinds of things because they've got to learn to have quiet time to check in with themselves and say, what's going on? What do I want? Not what do my parents want? Not what are my friends doing? But what do I want? What feels right to me?
There's like no quiet time now. Like quiet time now is scrolling on your phone, which is noise. I mean, that's just like snippets of I think I saw some statistic that I was like, oh my God. I think in like 24 hours, we consume more information than an average person did back like, I should have looked this up, but like not too long ago, right? In like the pretty like recent past. And humans are like not designed to intake that much emotion and information. And it's like it's what you're talking about. It's like overload. So this inability to find quiet and recognize the intuition, and then, intuition is a muscle, practice it. It's super, super important. It's really important.
All the little forks in the road that I've taken in my life, the decisions I've made, and I really wasn't even aware of it. I don't think consciously. I can look back and go, oh, I followed my urges. For some reason, I was good at that. And I think we all have those urges, intuition, whatever you want to call it. But I think you have to have enough quiet time to be able to check in and say, this doesn't feel right, or I'm not happy, or I don't know. I'm restless. I know what that means. It means I need to take a harder look at what's going on and maybe make some different choices. So I think if people become aware of their urges and they follow them and they follow their intuition, I think that's what leads people on the next step of their path. And then once you're there, then that leads, like those dots. You just keep accumulating dots and experiences, and it ends up creating all kinds of pictures for yourself.
Yeah. And I think we were talking about this at some point, but one of my favorite quotes is the Steve Jobs quotes, which is, you can only connect the dots going backwards. You can't connect them going forward, which I love. But I think the more you pay attention to how they connected, you can actually start to connect them going forward. If you take real quiet and precise notice of why they're connecting and when they connected and all of that. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about is, what is that show where it's not Wheel of Fortune, with you have to figure out the word, and they give you the letter. And once you get enough letters, it's like, you know what the phrase is going to say. It's kind of like that, where it's like, as soon as you get enough of the letters, you can figure out what the phrase is or what the word is. And you just have to figure out a couple of those little.
I have a high school retreat coming up in 2 weekends. So I'm not sure what we're going to do yet. I'm working on, we always do different things, but mostly we follow their lead. But we have tons of exercises that we've developed over the years. But one of them is sometimes we'll have them sit down and look back. And Meg Jay has a book called The Defining Decade, which I read and really liked a lot. I interviewed her for my podcast like a year or two ago. And she talked about something that someone called identity capital, which to me basically means, what have you learned about yourself up till now? Like, what experiences have you had? What are you good at? What's your aptitude? What were you interested in? What were your passions? What motivated you? That can shift over time. But when you start to look at it like a timeline of that sort of thing, that's like how one way you can sort of maybe look forward with another dot, which is, this is what I've learned about who I am, what I like, what I'm passionate about, what turns my crank, where I get into those flow moments, what I really get into.
Yeah.
So that tells me something about me and what might be next. So I think any of us could, no matter what age, not necessarily just high school girls, it could be a 40-year-old who's restless in their job, is looking for what's next.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I could talk to you about this. I could do a whole session with me and my daughter, my 3-year-old, because she's amazing. And I'm sure you'd be like, oh, wow. But anyway, I could talk to you for a long time, but you've been very generous with your time. What do you have coming up? So you have a college workshop coming up.
Different. Every month's different. Like not this weekend. The weekend after, we're going to California to help run a family retreat. There are, I think there's 20 families. So we'll do icebreakers. We'll do some parenting sessions. Sometimes we'll do sessions with the parents and the older kids together. I have the weekend retreat. I have 3 weekend retreats in the fall and 3 in the spring. 1 for grade schoolers, 1 for middle schoolers, 1 for high schoolers. So I have all 3 of those coming up: high school, middle school, and grade school. In the summer, we have summer camps for girls. So I don't prepare for those yet, but we're busy enrolling for those.
Yeah.
And plus, like you, I do a podcast every week. There's lots of prep for that. I do a lot of reading and all that. I love to read.
Yes, I've noticed that you are full of book recommendations, which we're going to include some of the ones that you mentioned. And of course, you've written books. Are you writing any more? How?
I haven't. I wrote about 5 children's books. Like 5 or 10 years ago, and tried to get them published, and none of them got published. So they're sitting on a shelf over there. So at some point soon, I want to revive those.
Yeah.
And somehow find a different way to get those out. That's one of the things I'm interested in. Plus, I've been putting a lot of energy into the podcast. So that's sort of been the bigger thing than writing. A lot of parents told me I used to write a lot of blogs. I should do a blog every week and articles for different things. But a lot of young parents said, I don't really have time to read that much, to read a book.
Yeah.
But they'll listen to books, but they said we listen to podcasts more. And so I started shifting. I haven't done blogs in a long time. I think I've done my podcasts, I think maybe 6 years or so. I just did my 270th podcast.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
cool.
So they said we'd rather learn that way. So I said, okay. And so I have done a lot of energy goes to that too. I'm only in the office a couple of days a week seeing patients. I see girls 2 days a week.
Okay. All right. Yeah. But I love it. I love when people have a bunch of different things going on. I think it helps people understand and see that it's okay. Because I think a lot of the time just to go back to it, we're kind of taught like you do this and this is what you do. And it's very, linear and whatever. And a lot of the time it's not. A lot of the time it's like you have one hand over here, a foot over there, your nose over there, and it all kind of works together. It kind of depends on your personality and a lot of different factors. But I have some clients who have a lot of, different interests. And so it's wonderful to hear somebody who is doing, has a mission through a lot of different modalities. I think it's really reassuring. So thank you. And definitely, if you're listening still, go check out Dr. Tim's podcast. He was very kind and had me on a week or so ago, and it was wonderful. So go check that out, which is available on
everywhere, Spotify and Apple Tunes. I mean, well, not everywhere, but there's 8 or 9 sites or something that they're on. So I think anywhere you get your podcast, it should be on that.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much. And check out all of Dr. Tim's work. If you are a parent, if you are a young girl, please reach out to him. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I'm so grateful for your precious time and energy. And if anything resonated with you, please feel free to share with a friend and subscribe. If you're interested in career coaching, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Courtney@resume-careers.com and follow me on Instagram at Courtney Austin Page. Thank you so much and see you next week.